Hey HCDA, and today I want to show you the awesome new updates that came to Final Factory. This was already a pretty good factory game, honestly, but these updates really improved the game further. For example, this is a old game of mine. Now, see all these clunky straight lines we need to use for transport? Those are a thing of the past, or at least if you want them to be. So, let me dive into a new game and show you exactly what's new. Now, one thing that didn't change is that you still need to set up some basic mining operations and stuff like that in the beginning. The core of the game hasn't really changed. However, once you open the technology tree, you will see an actual technology tree. Now, I believe this was already added in a little bit before this update, but it is very nice to actually see what is going to lead to what type of research once you actually unlock it. So it's just a quality of life thing, but I really think this is useful. Now, what is super useful is one of the first things you will actually unlock. So first you still need to unlock the ship assembly so you can actually automate building your mining ships and stuff like that. But after that you're going to get access to the mass drivers. Now you might remember how we used to link all of these things up with these perpendicular kind of cargo lines, stuff like that, to make sure everything was actually automatically delivered to our stations making these ships. Well, you no longer have to do that. You can actually use these mass drivers that I built over here. Just connect them to your production lines. And for example, I am producing some plasma engines over here. So plasma engines need to go over here where we're actually building our ships. Now, obviously, I could have just built this in between like we used to do, so it's all nice and neat, but you no longer have to. What you can simply do is say to this mass driver, okay, I want you to deliver your stuff to this mass driver over here, and then look, if everything's working like it should, there we go. It is actually shooting the items, teleporting the items across space into a different space station. Now, if you do this for several of these, you can still combine these, so you can actually make sure that there is a lot of stuff going from one space station to the other. Now, the range on these things is actually pretty huge. So if you hover over it, you can see the range. It's not unlimited or anything like that, and you still need to think a little bit about what you build where, but this makes building in the early game a lot more flexible than it used to be. Now, it is worth noting that these mass drivers are actually super fast in transporting their items. So if you look at the tooltip, you can see the speed is 10 items per second, so that is 600 per minute. If we compare that with a miner, let me pick a miner that has actually been producing. Here we go. A miner will produce over 100 items per minute. So you can actually hook up about 5 or 6 of these to a single mass driver and still make sure all your product is being delivered to wherever you need it to go. Aside from being really fast, the mass drivers also allow you to make very nice, interesting looking, awesome looking new layouts as well. For example, I have something over here. I can set this ore to be delivered in the middle of this installation. And then, assuming that works, yep, there we go. It is going to first funnel it into all these atomic printers, make a low density structure out of that, and then funnel it back into the mass driver over here. Now, this means that you're no longer limited to builds that go from left to right or top down or whatever direction you picked. But you can actually have items being transported into the middle of a structure, and basically you can have the items go wherever you want them to go, which is super useful. Now, if you're going to do that, I do recommend that you build in some storage holes here and there, mostly so you can kind of siphon off of some of those items still, where before I was doing that through the cargo holds. But that is maybe just a thing I did. Just keep in mind that you do need to kind of rethink how you're building your structures like that. Now, the nice thing about being able to do exactly that, and that is transporting items into the middle of a thing to a mass driver, but also being able to kind of reroute it backwards onto that first mass driver as well, is that these mass drivers can receive items, but they can send out different items. So the ore is coming into this build over here. We are making the low density structures in here. And then I just set the destinations for the outgoing items into the next similar layout. And this is one that is using assemblers to start making some of the plasma engines that we saw before. Again, very similar setup, just in and out. And then the plasma engines being made here are then transported to my shipbuilding factory over here. And you can definitely see the potential in this. You can way easier mix and match. It looks a lot cleaner than with all those cargo drones flying around and things like that. That might just be a thing I like, but still, I think it's important. And yeah, I'm just super excited about this, but this is not everything. For example, can you see what is missing here? I'll give you a moment. Hint, it's the heat sinks, because we are no longer producing any form of heat in the assemblers. So as you can see, no heat is building up. This was actually a pretty important balancing change, because heat is still in the game, but it doesn't come into play until a little later. So initially you don't have to worry about anything else but power. Speaking of which, there's another thing that you might have noticed, especially in this slightly larger build I have over here. There are no station cores in here to increase the stability. In fact, I am not using any stability enhancing buildings in here, yet this is still a pretty large station. Now, if we hover over this, you can actually see I am using the maximum stability, but the stability cap has been raised. So the default stability cap is now 60, so you're able to just build a little bit of a larger station if you want to. Something else that has been updated since I last showed you the game was the Celestara Oracle. It was already in the game and you could already buy yourself some upgrades, but there have been added a couple of new things. The most important one of which two of which I really like are the action range and the gathering range, because that makes everything so much easier when you're flying around your factory. Of course, you still have very important things like increasing your inventory size, for example, as well as, of course, increasing your crafting speed and, generally speaking, your speed as well. And all of this is just way more rewarding in terms of exploring the map, finding some of these obelisks, getting those orbs, and making sure you get all of those quality of life upgrades as you go. You can get quite a few upgrades pretty early on, as you can see. They are really cheap to get. I think I'm 1 hour into this game in this save that I'm showing you right now, and I already have six of those orbs. So I found, I think, 3 of these orbs and these obelisks flying around. And that means I can upgrade my speed a little bit, my action radius, etc, etc. So that is super useful and super convenient to make the early game more enjoyable. Now, these changes so far by themselves are fairly minor, but they kind of add up to almost what feels like a different game, and I mean that in a good way. Now, this is my factory a little bit further into the game, and as you can see, not only does it look very nicely organized, even though I haven't been trying that hard, honestly, it also starts to feel a lot more like an actual space game. Because honestly, that was one of the major complaints I had before. It was a fun game to play, but it didn't really feel like we were playing a game in space. I mean, you have these bots flying around, but all the cargo drones and everything being so limited in their mobility didn't really feel like we were flying through space. Also, the fact that you couldn't really build a large space station without already running into stability issues kind of was limiting the fun there a little bit. So even though these constraints have been relaxed and that makes the game a little bit easier, I do think it is for the best. If you get a little bit further into the game, the stability actually has another change that is super important. So, as I showed you before, a default station has a maximum stability of 60 that you can use to start building stuff. Now, if you add a station core to that, that becomes 160. So a single station core adds 100 stability to that station. Now, you can actually start adding multiple station cores to a single station. There is a diminishing return, so if you look at this, a second station attached to another station brings it up from 160 to 210, so the second one is only half effective once you add it, but you could build a larger station if you add 2 station cores to that station. You can keep adding them. The diminishing return starts adding up every time it's the half of the previous one. So the first one adds 100, the second one adds 50, the one after that adds only 25, the next one adds only 12. So as you can see, you don't want to start building things with like a dozen station cores. That won't really do much, but you can definitely build some pretty decently sized stations with just a couple of station cores now. Another thing that I didn't actually realize was annoying me in the previous version of the game I played, but when it was pointed out to me, I was like, yeah, that was actually a problem. was the fact that it was pretty hard to predict where the enemy would be coming from. Every now and then you would have this random gap in your factory and enemies would fly through and start messing things up. It's not the biggest problem in the world, so this is why I didn't really notice it that much, but it could be really annoying. However, we now have the ability to toggle signal on the map, and this will show you basically in which area you are agitating the enemy. So your factories are producing signal. The bigger and more complicated and more high powered your factories are, the more signal you will be producing. So you can basically predict, okay, if there's any enemies in this area, and especially in the more highlighted areas, that is where they will be attacking. That also means, as far as I can tell, that if you just go and clear out every enemy that is in this particular zone, it's not as big as it looks, then you are actually going to be left alone. Now, of course, you're going to be expanding your factory after you do that, and then the signal will spread and you will have to clear out a little bit more. But it is a pretty easy way to make sure you're not just constantly getting attacked and you know exactly where you need to go in order to fix that problem. Now, in order to deal with those enemies, I used to build defensive stations that looked something like this. Just an exploration center, so make sure the fog of war on the map is cleared out even if you're not there. A couple of defense platforms to make sure you have a lot of those bats flying around and killing the enemy, of course. Along with some repair centers to make sure that everything was repaired back up in case anything got damaged. Now, you can definitely still do this. It's pretty viable and pretty common to, I guess, still continue to do this, but you can actually do it quite differently now as well. For example, you could do something like this. Now, you might think there's a couple of the same things going on, and yes, I still have some defense platforms. I have some repair centers in here, so that is still the same. However, there's 3 new things in here. First of all, we have the overdriver. Now, this is a building that you can use to basically improve every other building that it's being attached to in the same station. This thing does consume a whole lot of power, hence the 2 antimatter stations. And by the way, because I am now using antimatter power stations, I do need to start using heat exchangers once again. So we're kind of back to the systems that were in place before as well. But what this does is that this is actually going to improve the functionality of my other buildings. So as you can see, 2 of these add up to a total bonus of 50%, so 25% each. And this means that this exploration center is now going to be able to clear 50% more radius around itself in terms of clearing out the fog than it would without these overdrive things. So this is just one use case of using those overdrive things, but I think it's really interesting to see what you can do with that. Now, probably more importantly, at least that's more of my favorite thing, is that I have laser turrets in here. And if you've used laser turrets before this update, you will notice that these would normally not work because they required fuel. And again, that was something that was really kind of bugging me before because, well, lasers don't really burn fuel. They run on electricity. We have electricity here, so they should be working. The good news is they actually do now. So all you need to do is make sure you have power to these laser turrets. Specifically, you are going to want to be using capacitors. These are basically just batteries that charge up and they are used to power the more high power things, like for example turrets. And this means that we can now use static defenses without having to rely on bats that need to be constantly reproduced if they die. Of course, turrets can be destroyed, so in that case you would need to rebuild them, but just having static defenses is super cool. And of course, as you can see, you can just combine the 2, but these defense stations are super cool. And again, just to show you the difference on the range, this is a default exploration center with the range. You can see that over here. And then you have the increased range over here. So this is actually quite a lot bigger than before, just by putting in some extra power and some overdrivers. So again, just one use case, but super fun and useful. Now, of course, when you get to the part of the game where you're going to be constructing things that need multiple in and outputs, like for example the solid state lasers, you can still use very easily the mass overdrives to do exactly the same. So you can see I have 2 mass drivers receiving the items over here, and then a third one because I was running out of space in order to export the solid state lasers. And templates like these can very easily be used now to just copy paste and start expanding your factory just a little bit faster than you did before, while still looking very, very nice. Now, if you're worried about this signal spreading all over the place, as you can see once you start expanding your factory, there is a way to solve that as well. There is a signal dampener in the game that actually reduces the signal your factories are outputting. Now, having said that, it doesn't do all that much, and it also reduces the efficiency of your buildings, because as you can see, for example, over here, my mining installation as an example, it is producing quite a bit of signal. I'm not entirely sure what dBm stands for, honestly, but it's producing 42 of it right now, and that is despite having a signal dampener attached to that reduces it by 6. So I would have to attach quite a few more of these signal dampeners in order to get this to 0. Well, assuming that is your goal, of course. A reduction is a reduction, so there's something to say for that. But these things also consume 20 kilowatts of power, and by producing power and doing other stuff, you're of course going to be producing some signal as well. So all in all, I've tried to build designs that were completely signal neutral. You can, but it's really, really finicky, and I wouldn't recommend it. But especially on the outskirts of your factory, you might find some use for these signal dampeners to, well, reduce the signal, even if you're doing that at a efficiency loss. And if for whatever reason you're getting attacked too much or something like that, this could be a solution. I would just recommend go out, kill the enemy, and get rid of him that way, and use the map to tell you exactly where you need to go in order to make sure to, that you're not going to be attacked all that much. Okay, and can I just say that the fact that you can put lasers on your ship now and fly around and not have to worry about fuel too much and stuff like that is awesome. And I know you could kind of do that before as well, so this is not the biggest change in the world, but driving around in a big ship firing lasers is just super, super cool. However, what is way more important when it comes to ships is the question, do mass drivers actually work with ships as well? Because if they don't, that still means that you're going to be in a lot of trouble getting stuff across your empire once you get a little bit later into the game. Well, the good news is, yes, they do. There's actually 2 sizes of command cores now. I think last time I played there was only the big ones, so you can make it look a little bit cleaner if you want to build a smaller ship. But anyway, more importantly, if you design, sorry, let's have this fly. If you designate a landing space and you make sure the mass drivers are connected, as you can see, the mass drivers will reconnect once the ship gets in range and just start firing again. Now, you don't actually need the landing sites for that. I just wanted to show you that that actually works. But if you land the ship anywhere else, so basically as soon as the new mass drivers that are landing become a viable target within the range of their original targets, not entirely sure what the ship is doing. Oh, it's actually flying back to its previous destination. But anyway, you just saw it. The mass drivers will connect to the ship wherever it lands. So if you need to move around some of your stations for whatever reason, you don't have to reconnect all your mass drivers straight away, as long as, of course, the targets are still in the range. So very much quality of life there, which also means that if you're like me and you have a little bit of OCD where you want to make sure your stations are all nicely aligned, like you can see over here, and for whatever reason you want to move something, you can actually do that. Which brings me to the last change I want to discuss, but it's a very important one, at least to me, because this was probably the thing that I actually just found stupid. I'm gonna be honest. I didn't understand it, why it worked the way it did, and it has completely changed now. So, before, when you wanted to build a planetary research box, or basically any other tier 2 unit, so the tier 1 being the asteroid research spots and the planetary ones being the next level of that. What you had to do is you needed to build an asteroid research spot first. Then you had to decommission the ship that you just built, basically recycle it, and then you needed to build the planetary version or the next tier of whatever you were building from the recycled version of the previous one. Why? I have no idea. Honestly, there's probably some thought behind that design concept, but I didn't get it. I mean, this is a game where these ships are only of limited use, so it's not like you're sitting on hundreds of them. So you were actually building brand new ships to recycle them to build a new one. As you can see, that is no longer the case. You can just straight up actually build planetary research pods now just by using items you can actually just produce. You don't have to build ships and then decommission them anymore. Small change. Super annoying how it worked before, at least in my opinion, and that has completely been removed. It actually makes sense now, guys. So super excited about that. All of these changes combined actually add up to quite a different game than it was before. I mean, just look at this factory. This looks completely different to the factory I showed you at the beginning of this clip. And honestly, it was super easy to build. It was super fun to build, which is probably the most important thing. And all of this brought me to about halfway into the technology tree. Of course, it gets a little bit slower as you progress because there's a lot more stuff to do. But all of this was like an evening or two playing. And just makes you feel like you're progressing a lot more. I have to say, in the previous version of the game, the early game could be a little bit slow, especially if you're a little bit less experienced than I am. So I think all of those retuning changes are really cool as well. As you can see, I haven't really been utilizing the fact that you can build larger stations yet. I'm definitely using the cap, so the initial cap, but what I haven't done yet is combine a couple of station cores together and build a larger space station. But if you do that, and especially for more of the end game, that actually opens up quite a few new ways to design your stations as well, along with, of course, the mass drivers. I do have to say, if you look at this, there is a little bit of spaghetti, laser spaghetti. I'm not entirely sure if that's a thing. Yeah, let's go with laser spaghetti. There's a little bit of laser spaghetti going on, but honestly, it's not that annoying. And I have to say it's a lot less annoying than have to take into account cargo ships that have to drive up and down and cargo drones and stuff like that. At the same time, that also means that I haven't actually used a single cargo drone or cargo ship in my playthrough now. So the mass drivers can just basically completely take those out of the equation. And although they're still in the technology tree, you can still upgrade them, so you can still build them if you want. There's probably a use case for that somewhere. But I am really loving these mass drivers along with the upgraded cap on the stability. Also, the fact that you don't have to worry as much about heat anymore, I think is a very nice improvement, especially for the very early game, because for new players that might be a little bit stressful because you have like power, stability and heat pretty much from the get-go. And now that mechanic gets introduced a little bit later. So all in all, nice little rebalancing changes, and I really think those are nice improvements. On top of that, if you haven't actually played this game yet, I can highly recommend it. I am not being sponsored or paid or anything like that to say all of this. I have played the game, I really like the game, so go and check it out if you haven't yet. It's made by mostly, I think, one single guy. So Ben, if you're here, you're awesome. But by the way, yeah, just supporting indie developers like that, I think, is a very good case, especially if they're making good games, of course. I mean, that should be a mandatory requirement, but I definitely think this game fits that bill. So, if you're still here, you're awesome. Go try out Final Factory, and I hope to catch you in the next one.